Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Watts, and I'm with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. And we are all here for the error rate training for Year 1 states on creating the sampling decisions, assurances, and fieldwork preparation plan and the customized record review worksheet. I'm just going to wave to everyone, and then I'm going to turn off my video. All right. Before I start introductions, I want to address a couple of logistical matters. The slides and a copy of the data collection instructions were sent out to all of the registrants about an hour or so ago. If you did not get them, you can either let us know in the chat or send an email to Heidi. Her email address is at the bottom left, Heidi Freimiller, and she can get those sent out to you. If you have any technical issues that come up, hopefully not, but if you lose audio or whatever, you can let Heidi know and she will assist you. If you have any questions about anything I'm presenting, at any point you can put your question in the chat box and we'll stop at a few points to address those. All right, so again, I'm Katie Watts. I'm with NCSIA, the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. I'm the error rate lead. I have with me 3 program specialists from the Office of Child Care, Oversight and Accountability Division, Adi Fator, Penny Job, and Linda Winings. And I also want to say hello and welcome to the regional office staff that have joined us today. And also welcome to all of you from our Year 1 states. The purpose of today's webinar is to get all of you started with the error rate review and walking through how to create the first 2 submissions, which again are the sampling decisions, assurances, and fieldwork preparation plan, or SDAP, and the customized record review worksheet, which we usually will write as RRW to save space. These are the 2 submissions that will set you up for conducting your error rate review. So we'll be walking through these in detail. And before we close out, we'll briefly touch on some next steps and how to get support as you begin the process. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the error rate review and the data collection instructions. I know this might just be a refresher for some of you. I do recognize a lot of the names, so I know some of you are pros at this already. But if you're new, the error rate review is a process where CCDF lead agencies measure eligibility errors and improper payments in their child care subsidy programs. Reviewers from the lead agency will examine a random sample of 276 case records from a specific period and look for any eligibility errors. And then you will report on your findings, including causes of your errors and improper payments, and your plans to reduce future errors. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, what you'll be doing. Some more background information: each of the 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and DC, conduct the review once every 3 years on a rotational cycle. So there's 3 cohorts of states, and you're all Year 1 states. And you'll next be reporting on your error rates in June of 2026. However, that report is based on case records from October 1st of 2024 through September 30th of this year. That's what we call the review period, so we are in that review period right now. There are 6 steps to completing the error rate process. The first step is to learn about the process by reading the data collection instructions, and we usually refer to this as the DCI. The DCI includes all of the templates for the different error rate submissions and instructions for completing each submission. There's instructions for sampling and instructions on conducting the reviews. The DCI was recently revised. In fact, it was just approved a few weeks ago. It hasn't even been posted yet on the OCC website, but we are sharing it with you today. Like I mentioned, it was emailed earlier. So this is the current DCI that is in effect. And I will share a little bit more information about that on the next slide. But for now, I'll move on to the next step of the error rate review. And that is to plan for your reviews by creating and submitting the SDAP. And that must be submitted by October 31st of this year. Then customize the record review worksheet template, which is the tool that you'll use to conduct your case record reviews. And we will be discussing how to customize the worksheet on this webinar. Once the SDAP and the record review worksheet have been created and submitted and approved, then you may begin conducting your 276 case record reviews. Step 5 is to report the results of your reviews in our final report, which we call either the State Improper Payments Report or the ACF 404. And finally, if your error rate is greater than 10%, and when we say error rate, that is referring to the percent of your CCDF payments that were improper payments. If that is the case for your state, then you will be required to create and complete a corrective action plan. And throughout each of these steps, you can receive TA support from NCSIA. And we will hold at least 2 more training webinars between now and June of next year. We'll have a webinar on conducting case record reviews, and there will also be a webinar on completing that state improper payments report. So I mentioned in the last slide that the Data Collection Instructions, or DCI, was recently revised, and I wanted to give a little bit more detail about that. The DCI is revised once every 3 years, and the prior version, which would have been the one that was used last cycle, if you were involved last cycle, that expired a couple months ago. The new revised DCI was approved last month, and this is what we will be using through March of 2028. Your cohort, the year 1 cohort, is the first one to use this revised DCI. The good news is that there are no significant changes to the methodology. Mostly we just went through and provided some clarifications and some more examples based on some of the questions that we've gotten from states over the last few years. So we hope that the changes will be helpful for you. There are a few minor changes to some of the templates. There's an overview of these changes in the introductory chapter of the DCI, so you can look at that to get an idea of what's been changed. And since we are focusing on the SDAP and the record review worksheet in this webinar, I will point out where there have been changes to those. But again, it's nothing major. I'm going to stop for questions. Have any questions come in?
There have been no questions, Katie.
Thank you. In that case, we're going to move on. This time we'll dive into how to create the first required submission for the error rate review. which is the sampling decisions, assurances, and fieldwork preparation plan.
Katie,
Or
we
the
just
SDAP.
we just got a
Mhm.
question.
Oh,
Um,
well,
Andrus
why don't
will
we,
ask,
yeah.
yeah, Andrus will ask, can you submit the SDAP earlier than October 2025?
October, yes, absolutely. In fact, we've had a couple of year one states that have already submitted it. So yeah, whenever it is ready, you may submit that. And we will be talking about kind of the process for completing and submitting it in a few minutes. The SDAP contains your plans for sampling cases and conducting reviews. And as I mentioned a few times already, the SDAP template can be found in the data collection instructions. And it will be submitted through the CARS system. Now, this is a departure from past few cycles where you would have used the OLDC system to submit. Right now, the CARS system is not available for the SDAP. So kind of going back to Anne's question, if you do want to submit early, you may certainly do so, but you would just complete the template from the DCI and email it to your regional office for approval. And of course, we will be talking more about the CARS system in a little while, so I don't want to get too deep into that right now. Just so you know that the system used to submit is changing. You cannot begin sampling cases until the SDAP has been approved by the regional office. However, you can begin working on the next submission, which is the customized record review worksheet. And that can be submitted before the SDAP has been approved. In fact, some lead agencies like to submit their SDAP and their record review worksheet at the same time even, and that's acceptable. The SDAP consists of 3 parts, and over the next few slides, I want to go through each of the items. While I go through the items, I'll point out, I think I mentioned this already, but I'll point out the areas where there have been changes from the prior SDAP template. Additionally, you'll see on the bottom, I've included the page numbers in the DCI where you can get additional instruction for the items or the content that I presented on the slide. The first part of the SDAP Part 1 is where the state will record their sampling decisions. All lead agencies draw a sample of 276 cases for their error rate review, but you'll also draw some replacement cases separately from the main sample. And these are put aside unless you need to use them, like if a case drawn from the regular sample is unavailable. In item 1A, you will share how many replacement cases you'll be drawing per month. We ask that you plan to select at least 3 monthly replacement cases, and you can choose more. If you think you'll need to select a lot of monthly replacement cases, if you have reason to believe that you might need a lot, that's fine, but please share the reason in your SDAP. And then you will select the box to agree that you'll obtain approval from the regional office before using any replacement cases. Continuing with 1A, you will clearly describe your procedures for collecting your sample. And Chapter 4 of the DCI includes more instructions on creating your response to this item, so you might want to reference that. And be sure to mention that you will be drawing the replacements separately from the main sample. Now, the wording in item 1A, including both on this slide and what was on the previous slide, this wording has changed a little bit from the previous SDAP template, but it's still asking the same things. 1B asks for the name of the source of your random number generator. And you will need a random number generator to set up your sampling. And you only need to share the name of that source here. A lot of lead agencies use the rand function of Excel, but you can use anything. Even a website that can generate a random number is fine. The next set of items in the SDAP 1C asks about the frequency of monthly sampling frames and projected start dates. And there's a note here to remind everyone that lead agencies cannot begin sampling until the SDAP has been approved. First, select your frequency for collecting monthly sampling frames. This isn't how often you'll be conducting reviews, but how often you'll be sampling cases. And if you select other, then describe your plans. Continuing with 1C, we next get into the projected start dates. We ask for the projected start date both for sampling and for reviewing cases. And just keep in mind that you are not held to these dates, so if things change and you end up getting started a bit earlier or later, that is perfectly okay. And then this is a new item on the SDAP, and it is optional, but if you have anything you want to share about your start dates, if there's some unique circumstances or anything else you think that we should know, you can include it here. That's the end of part 1 of the SDAP. Now we move on to part 2, and that's the assurances, sorry. I'm not going to read through all of these now, but please do look it over before you check yes on the bottom. And I do want to draw your attention briefly to number 6, which is new. This is where you will agree that none of the documents that you submit to the Office of Child Care will contain any personally identifiable information. And the final set of items on the SDAP is part 3, which is the fieldwork preparation plan. And in this section, you'll describe your error rate team and plans to prepare for the review. 3A is where you'll identify your project leadership. First, give the names, job titles, and roles of your leadership team. And to be clear, this is just asking about those whom you consider to be part of project leadership. We don't need you to list everyone who will be involved with the review. Share what their roles will be in the process, and then click on the box here to show that you agree with the statement that the leaders understand the program and can ensure that the timelines are met. Next, give the name and job title for the person who will certify and submit the ACF 404 report, the final report. And we have a new item. This one is also optional. Here you can share the name and title of a backup person who will also be able to certify and submit the final report if necessary. And we do strongly recommend having a backup in case the first designee is out of the office when revisions need to be made, or if they have any issues with getting into the car system. So we do recommend completing this item. Three B asks for some information about the review team. What we're looking for here is a description of who will be on the ground doing the case record reviews. You don't have to give names, but just let us know the size of the team and a description of the composition. You can share the unit or the office where the reviewers come from. You can also share a breakdown of who will be doing like the first level reviews versus the second level reviews. Information like that is helpful here. Along 3C is on inter-reviewer consistency, and there is a lot in this item, so I'll try and break it down clearly. You'll select the method or methods that you'll use to ensure inter-reviewer consistency. And all lead agencies are required to select this first box for re-review of cases. And underneath, describe the number and percentage of each type of case that will get a re-review. The description here, this is not a new item on the SDAP, but what is new is that we're breaking down the different type of cases, including improper payment cases, non-payment error cases, and cases with no error. And we recommend a re-review of all cases that have an improper payment and at least some of the other cases. This slide shows the rest of item 3C. These are the other methods that you can use for inter-reviewer consistency. And these methods are optional, but if you do select one or both of them, be specific in your description about how they will contribute to establishing that consistency between reviewers. (3D) is all about error definitions, and we're going to spend a little bit more time digging into this item. In the SDAP, we ask the lead agency to give 3 definitions. The first definition is just for errors, and this is a general definition that encompasses all errors that you might find in this review. Next, give a definition for improper payment errors, in other words, eligibility errors that result in an improper payment. Definition for non-payment errors or administrative errors. And these are eligibility errors that do not result in an improper payment. So we need 3 definitions, and I would like on the next few slides for each of the error types to show an example of what would be a good error definition, as well as one that would not be approved. Starting with the general error definition. Take a look at the top right. An error is a violation or misapplication of eligibility policy or procedure governing the child care subsidy program, which may or may not result in an improper payment. So this would be a good error definition. It encompasses any error that could be found in the review, and it clearly is covering both improper payment errors as well as administrative errors. And I'll read the definition in the bottom right. Any violation or misapplication of child care policies, rules, and procedures including eligibility error and intentional program violations from the parent or provider. If we saw this definition on the SDAP, we would need to send it back to the state for revision. And that's because of the last part, which I've underlined. It mentions intentional program violations. IPVs are not included in the scope of this error rate review, so we wouldn't want to see something like that. We're just focusing on eligibility errors. Let's move on to improper payment error definitions. On the top right, I have a good example. Any inaccuracy based on policy or regulation that impacts the subsidy amount paid to the provider. The difference may be positive or negative. This definition is clearly referring only to improper payments. It does not give any specific examples of error causes. You can do that in your definition, but if you do, just be sure not to be too specific or too vague. And I'm going to illustrate that in our next example. An improper payment error refers to any payment that should not have been made or a payment that was made in the incorrect amount due to miscalculation of income, miscalculation of cost share amount, or missing documentation. The problem with this definition is that last part that I've underlined. It gives some examples of error causes, but it reads like these would be the only causes of an improper payment error, and we know that there could be others. So if you do choose to give examples of error causes in your definition, that's fine, but just make sure that you're clear that your examples are not exhaustive, like all-encompassing. And finally, we have administrative errors or non-payment errors. On the top right, we have a good example of a definition. A finding that does not result in a change to the payment amount issued to a recipient or provider. So in your definition, be sure that you're specific that you're referring to errors that do not result in an improper payment. The other example is on the bottom right, any violation or misapplication of law, regulation, or policy governing the administration of CCDF grant funds, regardless of whether such a violation results in an improper payment. Again, the problem is with the last part, the underlined part, where it says regardless of whether such a violation results in an improper payment. This would make a good general error definition, but it is too broad for this. It doesn't specifically mention administrative errors. There are some more examples of error definitions in the DCI. So if you'd like to see some more, you can take a look there. But at this time, we're going to move away from error definitions and back to the next part of the SDAP. 3E asks for your plans for reviewing your state policies, procedures, and processes. First, describe your plan to ensure that the customization of your record review worksheet will use state policy in effect during the sample month. Make sure you consider whether there were or will be any policy changes during the review period. If so, you'll want to reference that here. Next, describe your plans to ensure that reviewers will consistently interpret error. So here you might want to say something about how this will be built into your reviewer training. You can also think about your plans for ensuring ongoing inter-rater reliability, which you described back in section 3B. Then the last part of 3E asks about the pooling factor. This is now numbered as 3E-1. In the past, we did not have this as a yes or no item. Now we do. We're asking you to tell us whether CCDF funds are pooled with funds, other funds for the review sample. Share how you determined whether a pooling factor will be used, including the name of the unit or people that are involved in that determination. And you would need to include a response to this even if your state does not use the pooling factor. In 3F, this is another item that has a lot going on in it, but it's asking about your information systems project responsibilities. And there's a list of tasks. Check off those that you will accomplish in partnership with IT systems and staff. If there are any other tasks that you would like to highlight, check others at the bottom and describe. And if any of these tasks were not checked, then you'll need to, I'm going to go to the next slide. You'll need to describe how and by whom those tasks will be accomplished. Then we have two new items about using an automated or electronic record review worksheet. If you do not have an automated or electronic worksheet, you don't have to answer these two items. If you do, first, share the process for developing the worksheet. And next, provide the time frame for IT to make improvements or upgrades related to its development. Finally, in the last part of 3F, describe your process to determine the annual amount of payments. This refers to all of the CCDF payments that were made for all children over the sample period. So share how you'll get this figure. For example, do you get it from a particular person or unit, or will it be pulled from a system? All right, we are almost to the end of the SDAP. The last part is 3G, case review logistics. And specifically here, we would like for you to share your plans for whether electronic or physical records are reviewed, or if it's going to be a mix. And next, share where the reviews will take place. The wording of this item, this is another one where the wording has changed a little bit from the prior DCI, but it's still asking the same thing. For the next part of 3G, we want to know how the lead agency obtains eligibility documentation. And this was included on the prior DCI, but we've expanded and clarified it a bit, so I've said it's new. If you have documentation stored electronically, please describe how you'll access it. And also, if you are going to need to get documentation from other entities, like if you get referrals from other agencies such as TANF or Protective Services, describe how you will obtain that documentation. Item on 3G, which is also the last item on the entire SDAP, is to describe the organization and maintenance of review files, including your plans for after the review is complete. Do we have any questions that have come in? I don't think so, but
Not.
great. So I am going to take a quick break from speaking and turn it over to Adi, who's going to share a bit more information on the CAR system.
Thank you, Katie.
Sorry, Adi, I'm sorry to interrupt. We just had a question come in.
Oh, okay.
And this is from Teresa Cooper. And she asks, can you elaborate on what the pooling factor is?
Yes, I can. It's not my strong point, but I can try, and certainly we have some more experienced staff that can chime in as well. But the pooling factor refers to when the lead agency combines CCDF funds with other funds such as like state funds, and the pooling factor is the percentage of funds that are CCDF. Please feel free to interrupt me if I'm saying anything that is not accurate, Adi and team. And this would be found, is this on the 800?
That's right, Katie. States do report that information to OCC.
Okay. Yes, so you might want to either take a look at your 800 report, or the person who is in charge of that, you can ask them about it. And certainly you can always reach out to us for some technical assistance as well on both determining whether you use the pooling factor and how to apply it on your final report.
And I think the DCI gives a little bit more information about why that's important, but I think in a nutshell, because states are reporting the estimated amount of the improper payments for CCDF, we want to make sure that number is only representing CCDF funds. So we don't want that number to be inflated, if that makes sense. So that's a very basic description, but that's one of the primary reasons once you get to the 404. Oh, and this is my slide. Good timing. So thank you, Katie. So as many of you know, my name is Adi Fatur. I'm with the Office of Child Care's Oversight and Accountability Division. And I just wanted to make a quick announcement. As Katie mentioned at the beginning of this training, we're excited to share that OCC will be transitioning to CARS for the error rate reports. And we are beginning with the SDAP for Cohort 1 states. So that's this group here. So we are finalizing the timeline, and we will have more details about training, about the actual release date, hopefully very soon. But we did just want to give this group a heads up, since you're going to be the first group of states interacting with CARS for the error rate report. So we think this is pretty exciting. A lot of you on this call might already be familiar with CARS. You've perhaps used it for the state plan, for the QPR, administrative data reports. This is, hopefully will ease some of the burden on states about having multiple reporting systems for various OCC reports. So what that means, though, and this gets to Anne's question earlier, in this interim period of time, so for the next few months, for the reasons I just described, we are not updating the SDAP in the OLDC. So this group of states will not be submitting the SDAP in the OLDC. You will be submitting it in CARS. But because we know historically, a handful or even maybe up to half of the states do like to get started early. If you're a state that wants to submit the SDAP prior to CARS being available, you can do that in an offline format. We know that's a little bit messy, but we want to make sure states can stick to their internal timelines, and we don't want to slow you down. So if that's something that you're interested in, please contact your regional office. If you're not sure who your current point of contact is, don't worry, we will reach out to you after this webinar and make sure you know how to get the error rate information that you need. So I think I have one more slide that will just give you a little bit of a sneak peek. There you go. So this, if you've used CARS before, this probably looks familiar. Again, this is not live. This is just a mock-up, but this is what the SDAP will look like. And this is how it will be available to you. So again, stay tuned for more information in the next month or so. And if you if you're a current CARS user or have any thoughts about that, feel free to pop it in the chat. And otherwise, I will turn it back to Katie. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move away from the SDAP and into the next required error rate submission, which is the customized record review worksheet. Oh, I see this question that just came in from Maria Mayorga, and that is going to be a question for OCC if the lead agencies will be able to see old submissions in CARS.
Yes, we are still working out exactly what that will look like, but we will make sure lead agencies continue to have access to prior reports. Thank you. Good question. And I can answer that in the chat just for the history of this call.
Yeah. And also related to that, we at Nixia, we also have all of the old submissions. So if for whatever reason you cannot pull it from CARS, or like record review worksheets, old record review worksheets would not be on CARS or OLDC. If you would like to see those, we do have all of those, so you can always get them from us as well. The record review worksheet provides a standardized way to assess the case record to determine whether eligibility was determined correctly and whether there was an improper payment. The record review worksheet consists of a series of elements, each of which deals with a different area of eligibility. Each element contains 4 columns, which each have a specific purpose, except for element 500, which only has 2 columns. And just so I can kind of illustrate what I'm saying by elements and columns and all of that, I'm going to pull up the template for the record review worksheet and quick show you. So if you might be new to this process, you can see what I mean. So kind of the, I guess, peach colored rows, those are the column headers. And then the rows underneath that are numbered, those are each element. So just scrolling down, each row is a different element that deals with a different part of eligibility. This is something called the mid-table, which we're not going to get into right now, but it is also part of the record review worksheet. And then, like I mentioned, element 500 is the element that only has 2 columns. The record review worksheet is a template, parts of which cannot be changed, and then parts of which are customized by lead agencies. You can use any format you would like to create your customized template and conduct your reviews. Some states use a Word document or Excel, an online database. Any of those are fine. However, you must be able to provide a printed version of the worksheet that conforms to the template as found in the DCI, which would be the template that I just showed you a moment ago. Your customized record review worksheet is submitted directly to your program specialist in the regional office. It is not submitted in CARS like the SDAP will be.
Katie, there is a question about that thing, that very thing.
Yeah.
Alma Gonzalez says, if our electronic RRW was approved in fiscal year 23, do we need to have it approved again in fiscal 26?
Yes, it will need to be approved again. There are a couple of little changes to a couple of the boilerplates, which I'll show you later on. So like you will need to make sure that those changes are incorporated into your worksheet, as well as just we would want you to go through and just make sure that it's reflecting all of the policies that are current. But you can certainly use it as a starting point and just can work off of that to make those changes. And I already mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, but you cannot begin your reviews until your record review worksheet template has been approved. Once you've familiarized yourself with the worksheet and you've determined what format you'll be using to create it, then you can go ahead and start customizing. In column 1 of elements 100 through 410, underneath the boilerplate, you'll add policy citations or other requirements for the reviewers to consider when assessing the case record. And I will show some examples of this in a moment. In column 2 of elements 100 through 410, add items that reviewers will complete to analyze the case record. When customizing the worksheet, make sure you do not remove anything from the template, with the exception of the NAs that are in columns 2 and 3. And let me show you what I mean by that, because throughout the template, as it's in the DCI, you can see that in columns 2 and 3, there's NAs. Those are in there to meet accessibility requirements. They're not really like officially part of the template. So when you go ahead and start customizing, please remove those NAs, but do not remove anything else. And also do not customize anything in columns 3 or 4. Do not customize anything in the mid-table portion or in element 500. Go through a few general tips for customizing your record review worksheet. Again, there's a lot more information on this in the DCI. But first, ensure your column 2 items allow the reviewer to assess whether there was an error in the element, and also allow the reviewer to share how that was determined. So the reviewer should have a place to record any documentation or verification that was reviewed. The next tip is to not include any items where the reviewer would be asked to record personally identifiable information, and that includes names of clients or children or providers, birth dates, addresses, workplace names, or provider license numbers. We recommend that you include comment boxes in column 2 of each element. Comment boxes will allow reviewers to record any information that cannot be captured by other items in the element. And finally, your worksheet should only include items that involve what we call front-end eligibility processes. And what we mean by that is we're interested in what happened during eligibility determination or redetermination, as well as what happened during authorization and any subsequent eligibility actions. That's what we call the front end. Don't include items for analyzing anything that took place following eligibility, such as payment processing or time and attendance. Those are what we call back-end errors. And also, I know I mentioned this already, but things like fraud are not included in the scope of this review. So we wouldn't want to see any items about that either. Right, I'm now going to show some examples of customizing certain elements of the record review worksheet. I'm not going to go through every element today, but the DCI does include examples and instructions that are specific to each element. And as I go through these, keep in mind that these are just examples. Your own state's customizations are going to look different because they're based on your own policies and eligibility requirements. So let's start with element 100. This slide shows the template with no customizations. On the top, you can see the 4 headers, the 4 column headers, which would not be changed. And in the top left corner in the first column is the boilerplate, which lays out the requirements for the element. Do not remove or change anything in the boilerplate. This is element 100, which is where the reviewer determines whether all required eligibility forms are present and completed appropriately. Under the boilerplate is where you would add your policy citations or other requirements. And here you'll want to make sure that all of the applicable components from the boilerplate above are addressed in the customization. You can see that in this example, the state added policy citations for application, assets, and certificate. We're going to stick with element 100 and move to the next part of customizing, which is column 2. Again, here you would add items to assist reviewers in conducting that analysis of the case record. And like in column 1, be sure that everything from the boilerplate that is applicable to your state is included here. So you can see that in this example, the lead agency added items on whether there's a signed application, there's an item on eligibility notification, an item on asset declarations, and then at the bottom, an item on the child care certificate. Again, this will look different in your state, but hopefully this can give you an idea of what customizing might look like. A couple of other things I want to point out. You can see here in the assets item, there's an NA box, since in this state, the item does not apply to all clients. So we encourage you to include NA boxes if you have a yes or no item that would not apply to all scenarios. Also note that we've included a comments box here, which we highly recommend including in each element. Columns 3 and 4 are not customized. You should not change or add anything to these columns. The exception would be that if you are working like in Microsoft Word and you want to put a text field in, that's fine. Or if you're in Excel and you want to do drop downs for your coding in column 4, that is fine as well. We just ask that when you print the worksheet that none of these additions show up. And an important thing to keep in mind when creating your customized worksheet template is to address any policy changes that might have occurred or will occur during the review period. Here's an example of element 310, residency. In this state, there was a policy change that occurred during the review period. And this is addressed in the customization with the effective date of the new policy. So we have a policy citation for residency and a note that self-attestation is acceptable after this date. Column 2 should also adequately address any policy changes that have taken place. In this example, in residency, element 310, the reviewer has added 2 sets of questions about verification of residency requirements with the effective dates. So it's very clear what the reviewer would need to answer based on the date of the most recent case action. And I did want to spend a moment on customizing element 410. 410, looking at the boilerplate, this is where the reviewer determines whether the eligibility worker's subsidy amount is correct, and if not, whether it resulted in an improper payment. Be sure to customize column 1 by adding any policies or any other instruction for reviewers on calculating authorizations, payments, or determining improper payments. And in column 2 of 410, we're really looking for a few specific things here. You have a lot of flexibility in creating your worksheet, but in this particular element, we do always want to see these components where there's a place to record the eligibility worker subsidy amount, the reviewer subsidy amount, the difference between the two if there is one, as well as the sample month payment amount. And a comments box is always useful to include as well. And you can certainly add additional items in 410 if you would like to, if you think that would be helpful. But we do kind of like to see this as a minimum.
Here you got a couple questions coming in.
Okay.
Vanessa asked, would that one have the NA? And I'm not sure the timing of when that question came versus which slide you were on.
So do you want?
Yeah, Vanessa, if you want to come off a mute and provide some context.
310.
310.
So for that, because you have one that says before 11/1/24 and one says 11/1/24, you have a yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have an NA on both of those so that you know, like, no, this, because if you're answering one, you may not be answering the other.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. I think that's a good idea to have an NA box so it's really clear that, you know, the reviewer understands that it's not from this date, it's from this date. So I've checked this one, but yeah, no, I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, basically any time that an item might not be applicable to everyone, I would say to have an NA. And then you said there was another question, Bob?
Yep, one more question. Do we need to include the math?
In 410, I assume?
That's when the question came through, yep.
Yeah. You don't need to. I'm not sure if you're asking, do you need to include math like when you're customizing, or does the reviewer need to include math? And I mean, really, it's not required for either, but I think it's, you know, usually helpful for at least the reviewer to, you know, include some of that information, especially if there's an improper payment.
Okay, yes,
Mhm.
I was meaning that, yeah, including the math when we're talking about like the differences or the subsidy amount and all that, yeah.
Yeah, if it's helpful, but
Okay,
I always think it is.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank
That's a
you.
great question. Right, for the most part, the record review worksheet looks pretty much the same in the new DCI as it did in the prior version. There are two boilerplates that have changed slightly. The first is in element 100. On the left is the old boilerplate, and on the right is the new one. And we've just added a bit at the end regarding presumptive eligibility requirements. So when you're creating your record review worksheet, just make sure that you're including the correct boilerplate for 100. And the second boilerplate that has changed is element 400, which is on financial requirements, income. Again, I've put the old version on the left and the new one on the right. And here the wording is exactly the same, but we've just added some kind of broken down into bullet points just to make it easier to read. Right, so we have I know we have till 2:30, but I always like to finish before the hour if possible. But some next steps. Again, a reminder that your last day for submitting the SDAP is October 31st, but you can definitely submit it before then. And your last day for submitting the customized record review worksheet is on December 31st of this year. And you can send your drafts to your NCSIA error rate specialist before you do your official submission. In fact, we highly recommend that. We like to take a look at the drafts and maybe catch any issues if there are any before you do your main submission, because that usually makes the approval process go a lot quicker. And on this slide, I just show a few more of the TA resources that NCSIA can provide. Our error rate specialist can help with answering any SDAP items that you might be stuck on. We can help you with customizing your worksheet and, of course, review drafts before you submit. We can also help with the submission itself, like once you're in CARS, if you're having some trouble with that, we are happy to help with that. On the right, I have the link to our Error Rate TA website, where we have an e-learning module. If you are new to this process, I encourage you to check that out. It covers the process from start to finish. And we have a few briefs and links to past webinars. And I say on here that we have links to submission templates. The new ones are not up yet. They will be soon, hopefully. So just kind of be mindful of that if you are getting a submission template from there, it might not be the most recent one. And finally, on this slide, I share contact information for our NCSIA error rate specialist by region. And that takes us to the end. We do have an evaluation of this webinar if you would like to share your feedback. I think Bob is going to share the link in the chat box, and I will also send it in a follow-up email. And I do see another question that came in, but I can't read it. Bob, do you mind reading that?
I do not mind. Maria asks, when do you anticipate we will be able to register in CARS if we are not an active user? What does the process to enroll entail? Do you suggest designating a few users?
These are all great questions, and these are the exact things we are working out right now. Maria, what state are you from, just for my own notes? If you want to pop it in the chat. Oh, great. Oh, right. Okay, great. We'll make sure to get back to you as soon as we have additional information. My understanding is it's a fairly straightforward and simple process, but we do definitely want to account for any folks on this call who aren't current users and build in that time. So at the point we get to training, you will be all ready to go and ready. And then, yeah, and in terms of a few users, generally that's how we've operated in the past. We feel like it's a good idea to have, depending on your structure and your review team and who needs to actually certify and submit the final report, we do recommend having backups and so forth. Great. Thank you, Maria. Appreciate the question.
Right. If there's no other questions, if you do think of anything, I have my email address if there's any general webinar follow-up, or you can also reach out to your error rate specialist. And oh, I see the one more question came in. Will this recording be sent out to everyone? We usually don't send out the recording to everyone, but if you would like it, we can certainly send it to you. Eventually we post the recordings, but sometimes there's a bit of a lag. But yeah, we can certainly follow up with you and get you that recording. All right, well, thank you everyone for your time and attention, and we really look forward to working with all of you to get this error rate review going. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.